Ladies and gentlemen, life has a strange way of teaching us lessons without making a sound. We spend so much energy trying to read messages, understand actions, and decode silence. But sometimes silence itself is the loudest answer. Let me share something with you. When someone keeps appearing in your thoughts, even when there's no conversation, no messages, no connection on the surface, that's not random. That's your heart reacting before your mind catches up. I'm not calling it love. I'm not calling it fate. I'm saying your inner self recognizes something your logic hasn't labeled yet. You ever notice how a person can sit quietly in your mind like a song playing in the background of your life? Time passes, distance grows, communication stops, yet somehow they never fully leave. You don't invite the thought, but it shows up anyway. During work, during laughter, during moments when you least expect it. That kind of presence isn't small. It doesn't rely on calls, texts, or social media. It exists deeper than that. It means something real was felt, something real was shared, something real was left behind. Feelings like that don't come from imagination. They come from genuine moments, genuine connection, genuine impact. Before we continue, if this message speaks to you, subscribe to the channel Harvey's World. And I want you to do one more thing. Comment below and tell us which country you're watching from. Let's connect across the world together right here on Harvey's World. Here's a fully rewritten, copyright-free version that keeps the depth, emotion, and reflective tone clean, original, and ready to use. You can pretend all day. You can fake interest, fake conversations, even fake distance. But there's one thing you can't fake, and that's presence. You can't fake the way someone stays with you long after they're gone. The way they linger in your spirit without trying. That's real, and real doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. A lot of people try to explain it away. They call it boredom. They call it loneliness. They call it nostalgia. But here's the truth. When someone truly meant nothing to you, they don't stay. They fade quietly, completely. They don't echo in your heart or show up uninvited in your thoughts. But when someone does stay, even without a single conversation, that means there's a connection still tied to you, invisible, but strong. And it's not always about romance. Sometimes it's a friend. Sometimes it's someone who changed you in a single moment. Sometimes it's someone you walked away from, but never fully released inside. The real question isn't why can't I stop thinking about them? The real question is, what did they awaken in me that I never dealt with? Because you're not stuck on the person. You're carrying the feeling. Maybe they made you feel understood in a way no one else did. Maybe they made you feel safe. Maybe they showed you a version of yourself you haven't seen since. Or maybe they hurt you deeply and the wound never healed. Either way, that thought is a message. Now, don't confuse this with a sign to run back. Thinking about someone doesn't mean you're meant to be with them. But it does mean there's something left unfinished inside you. Maybe it's closure. Maybe it's forgiveness. Maybe it's acceptance. Maybe it's learning the lesson without reopening the door. Strength isn't pretending you don't feel anything. Strength is having the courage to face it, to say, yes, this still affects me, and I want to understand why, because unaddressed emotions don't disappear. They harden. They turn into walls made of pride, silence, and fear. And those walls don't just block people, they block healing. Sometimes the connection stays because the chapter never closed. Sometimes timing ruined something real. Sometimes fear did. And sometimes it wasn't meant to last, but it was meant to teach. Either way, what you felt was real. And real things leave marks. You don't owe anyone a conversation just because they cross your mind. But you do owe yourself honesty. Sit with the feeling. Ask what it's here to teach you. Love, regret, gratitude, growth, whatever it is. Let it speak. When someone appears in your thoughts without effort, that's not noise. That's your inner voice, your intuition, maybe even a quiet nudge from God. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, saying, this mattered, pay attention. Sometimes the message is to forgive. Sometimes it's to let go. Sometimes it's to remember who you were. And sometimes it's simply to heal. Stop running from it. Stop burying it. The thought keeps returning because it wants resolution, not chaos, not drama, but clarity. And once you listen, once you truly understand what it's pointing to, the restlessness fades. You move lighter, stronger, wiser, because the thoughts that don't leave you aren't random. They're guiding you inward, and that's where the truth always starts. All right, here's a full, rewritten, original, copyright-free, long-form, motivational script, deeply expanded in tone, flow, and reflection. It keeps the emotional weight and spiritual insight, but everything is freshly written, not copied or traced. This version is long form, narration ready, and structured naturally for voiceover or podcast use up deep down. When the noise fades in, the world finally goes quiet. There's usually one thought that refuses to disappear, one name that still crosses your mind when nobody's watching. And here's the truth most people don't want to admit. Just because there's no conversation, just because there's no messages or calls, doesn't mean there's no connection. In fact, sometimes the connection becomes louder when everything else goes silent. Silence has a way of exposing what we've been trying to hide. During the day, we stay busy. We work, scroll, laugh, distract ourselves. But at night, when it's just you and your thoughts, that's when the truth shows up. That's when that person slips into your mind without permission. And no matter how much time has passed, no matter how far apart you are, something still stirs inside you. That's not accidental. That's not weakness. That's awareness. Pride, though, that's a different story. Pride is powerful. Pride will convince you to stay quiet even when your heart is loud. It'll have you ignoring emotions you don't want to face. It'll make you scroll past their name like it means nothing, even though your chest tightens for a second longer than you'd like to admit. Pride will make you act unbothered while your mood shifts the moment they come up in conversation. And you'll tell yourself you're fine. You'll tell everyone else you're fine. But deep down, you know something still matters. That reaction, that emotional shift, that's not nothing. That's connection, real connection, the kind you can't fake and can't force away. But pride hates vulnerability. Pride hates exposure. Pride would rather you look strong than actually be healed. Here's what most people get wrong. Vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is strength that doesn't need permission. Admitting you care, acknowledging your feelings, being honest with yourself, that takes courage. What's easy is pretending you don't care. What's easy is hiding behind silence. What's easy is avoiding the truth because facing it feels uncomfortable. Weakness isn't emotion. Weakness is denial. Weakness is locking your feelings away and calling it strength. Weakness is choosing ego over peace. Pride wants you stuck. It wants you to win the I don't care competition. It wants you to protect your image while your heart slowly grows heavier. And the prize for that victory? Loneliness, regret, missed chances, sleepless nights, where you replay conversations that never happened. You can win the argument and still lose the connection. You can guard your pride and still damage your peace. And peace, that's what you're really after, whether you realize it or not. When a connection is real, when it's true. Deeper than attraction or convenience, it doesn't disappear just because communication stops. It lingers. It follows you quietly. You could go months without speaking. Years even. You could be living separate lives in different places with different routines. But something still pulls at you when you think of them. You might hear their laugh in your head. You might dream about them without trying. You might catch yourself wondering how they're doing out of nowhere. That's not just memory. That's not just nostalgia. That's a living emotional bond trying to survive through silence. Now, let's be clear. This doesn't mean you always need to reach out. It doesn't mean every silent connection is meant to be revived. But it does mean you should be honest about what you're feeling. Because when pride blocks communication, it doesn't block the connection. It just blocks understanding. It blocks healing. It blocks growth. We've all been there. We've all let ego speak louder than love. We've all walked away when leaning in might have changed everything. We've typed messages we never sent. We've deleted words we meant with our whole heart. And sometimes the pain doesn't come from what was said. It comes from what was left unsaid. When someone keeps showing up in your thoughts, that's your heart knocking on a door you locked. And the key to that door isn't another distraction. It's honesty, it's humility. It's the willingness to admit this still affects me. Sometimes that honesty sounds like, I miss you. Sometimes it sounds like, I was wrong. Sometimes it's as simple as, are you okay? And sometimes it's not about fixing anything at all. Sometimes it's about honoring what was real instead of pretending it meant nothing. I have seen people hold on to grudges for so long they forgot why they were angry in the first place. I've seen people miss years of connection, growth, and love because they were too stubborn to say, let's talk. And in the end, they don't feel strong. They feel empty. And emptiness is loud when everything else is quiet. So ask yourself this, is pride worth the silence? Is ego worth the restlessness? Is pretending not to care actually bringing you peace or just more distance? Peace doesn't come from acting tough. It comes from being real. It comes from being soft in a world that tells you to harden up. It comes from having the courage to break the silence when it matters. That person who keeps appearing in your thoughts, that's not coincidence. That's not your mind playing games. That's your heart reminding you that something you felt was real, that the connection mattered even if the communication stopped. And here's something else people don't talk about enough. Sometimes they're thinking about you too, sitting in their own silence, wondering if you still care, fighting their own pride. And when both people stay quiet, that's how good connections fade, not because they weren't real, but because fear was louder than truth. But it doesn't have to end that way. Sometimes all it takes is one moment of courage, one message, one call, one honest sentence. And even if nothing changes between you and them, something changes inside you because you chose truth over pride. And that's where healing begins. That's where peace lies. Now let's talk about stillness. We live in a world that rewards constant motion, always busy, always distracted, always consuming something to avoid feeling something. But some of the most important answers in life don't come through noise. They come through stillness. Stillness forces reflection. Reflection brings clarity. That's why certain people pop into your mind without warning. No message, no reminder, no trigger you can point to. They just appear again and again. At first, you brush it off. You tell yourself it's random, but when it keeps happening, that's not randomness. That's unresolved energy asking for your attention. Most people avoid reflection because it's uncomfortable. In the quiet, memories resurface. Regrets whisper. Questions arise. Feelings you buried start knocking, and instead of listening, we scroll, work, drink, laugh, distract ourselves. But what you don't face doesn't disappear. It waits. Reflection isn't about living in the past. It's about understanding it. It's about asking yourself what those thoughts are really trying to say. Maybe you're thinking about him because you never got closure. Maybe because what you had was real, but fear got in the way. Or maybe it's not even about him anymore. Maybe it's about who you were when you were with him. Maybe you missed that version of yourself, the one who felt alive, open, confident. Seen, you won't know until you slow down long enough to ask. Real reflection isn't 5 minutes of thinking. It's sitting with uncomfortable truths. It's asking hard questions and staying long enough to hear the answers. That's how healing starts. That's how peace finds you. Some people say if he wanted to, he would. And sometimes that's true. But sometimes people don't say what they feel because pride, pain, fear, or timing keeps them quiet. So don't measure the value of a connection only by words. Some emotions lie deeper than language. If someone stays in your mind, ask yourself what you're meant to learn. Is it forgiveness, growth, closure, courage, or simply understanding? Reflection clears the fog. It helps you see what's yours to carry and what you need to release. Sometimes you realize the person isn't meant to return to your life. They showed up in your thoughts to teach you something, not to stay forever. That's the gift of reflection. It turns confusion into wisdom. It gives you the strength to move on or the courage to reach out. And don't let anyone tell you it's weak to think about someone. It's human. We're built for connection. When someone touches your heart in a real way, of course they'll return to your mind. That's not weakness. That's proof your soul is alive. So don't fear the quiet. Don't run from stillness. That's where your answers lie. That's where clarity waits. When someone stays in your thoughts without a single word being spoken, it's not noise. It's a message. And the only way to understand it is to slow down, reflect, and listen. That's where healing begins. That's where peace is found. That's where truth finally speaks. There's a reason certain people don't leave your mind no matter how much time passes. It's not because you're weak. It's not because you're stuck. And it's definitely not because you're broken. It's because some connections don't operate on surface level rules. They don't follow timelines. They don't disappear just because communication ends. They live deeper than habits and routine. They live in the places you don't show the world. You can move on with your life and still carry someone quietly inside you. You can meet new people, build new experiences, smile genuinely, and still have that one name echo in the background of your thoughts. That doesn't cancel your growth. It doesn't mean you're going backward. It means you're human. People think healing looks like forgetting, like erasing memories, like reaching a point where someone never crosses your mind again. But that's not healing. That's avoidance dressed up as strength. Healing doesn't mean the memory disappears. Healing means the memory no longer controls you. It means you can think about someone without losing yourself. And the truth is, some people come into your life not to stay forever, but to wake something up inside you. They activate parts of you that had been dormant. They show you what connection feels like, what safety feels like, what being truly seen feels like. And once you experience that, your soul doesn't forget it, even if the relationship ends. That's why silence feels so loud. Silence gives your thoughts room to breathe. And when they breathe, they wander. They wander back to moments that mattered, conversations that changed you, feelings that cracked you open. And suddenly, there they are again. Not because you invited them, but because your inner world is trying to make sense of something unfinished. Unfinished doesn't always mean unresolved with them. Sometimes it's unresolved within you. Maybe you never fully understood why it ended. Maybe you never said what you needed to say, Maybe you changed after knowing them and never acknowledged that transformation. Those things stay with you. We underestimate how much emotional energy gets stored in unspoken words. Every time you wanted to reach out but didn't. Every time you swallowed your truth to protect your pride. Every time you pretended you were okay when you weren't. Those moments don't vanish. They settle. They wait. And when life slows down, they rise. That's why reflection feels uncomfortable, because reflection forces you to face the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. It asks questions you can't scroll past. Why did that? Does it affect me so deeply? Why does this still matter? What am I afraid to admit? Those questions don't come to punish you. They come to free you. But freedom requires honesty, and honesty requires courage. Most people don't fear losing others. They fear being exposed. They fear admitting they cared more than they let on. They fear looking foolish for still feeling something when the world says they should be over it by now. But healing doesn't operate on deadlines. Hearts don't follow schedules. There is no expiration date on meaning. Some people leave your life but remain part of your inner architecture. They help shape the way you love, the way you trust, the way you guard yourself or open up. And pretending they didn't matter doesn't make you stronger. It just makes you disconnected from your own truth. That's why pride is such a dangerous companion. Pride tells you to suppress, to stay silent, to protect your image at all costs. Pride convinces you that reaching out is losing. That admitting you miss someone is failure. That vulnerability gives the other person power over you. But pride never asks. If you're at peace, peace doesn't come from winning imaginary battles. It comes from alignment when your inner truth matches your outer action. And when someone stays heavy on your heart, pretending they don't exist creates inner conflict. That conflict drains you slowly. You feel it as restlessness, as emotional fatigue, as distraction, as a quiet sadness you can't cue. Why'd explain? That's not because you want them back necessarily. It's because part of you wants resolution. Resolution doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes resolution is understanding. Sometimes it's forgiveness. Sometimes it's acceptance. Sometimes it's simply honoring what was real without trying to relive it. But you don't get resolution by running from the feeling. You get it by sitting with it long enough to hear what it's trying to teach you. Ask yourself, this not from judgment, but from curiosity. What did this person represent to me? Did they represent safety, validation, freedom, a version of myself I felt proud of? Often, what we miss isn't the person, it's the way we felt when we were with them. And that's important because it means the feeling didn't come from them alone. It came from you. They awakened it, but it belongs to you. That realization is powerful because once you understand that, you stop feeling helpless. You stop waiting for someone else to return so you can feel whole again. You realize you can cultivate that version of yourself independently. You can reclaim the confidence, openness, joy, or depth that connection unlocked. Still, that doesn't erase the impact. Some connections change you permanently. They raise your standards. They deepen your emotional range. They teach you what you're capable of feeling. And once you've experienced that, depth, shallow connections no longer satisfy you. That's not arrogance. That's growth and grow. E can feel lonely. When you outgrow surface level interactions, you crave substance. You crave honesty. You crave emotional safety. And when you don't find it easily, your mind drifts back to the last place it felt. That's why the past pulls on you, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Real moments leave fingerprints. Another thing people don't like to admit is that timing plays a cruel role in human connection. Two people can feel something genuine and still miss each other emotionally because they weren't ready at the same time. One was guarded, one was afraid, one was healing, one was still learning how to love. That doesn't make the connection false. It makes it human. And sometimes thinking about someone years later isn't about wanting to return. It's about finally being ready to. Understand what it was. You see it differently now. You recognize your own mistakes. You recognize theirs. You see the fear underneath the silence. That clarity doesn't always demand action, but it does deserve acknowledgement. Ignoring insight is how patterns repeat. When you refuse to reflect, you risk recreate the same dynamic with someone new, different face, same lesson. That's why life brings certain people back into your thoughts, not to torture you, to teach you, and the lesson might be simple. Speak sooner. Choose honesty. Trust your intuition. Don't abandon yourself to keep peace. Don't let fear make decisions for you. These lessons don't scream. You whisper, and they repeat until you listen. That's why stillness matters so much. Stillness is where intuition becomes audible. It's where your soul finally gets a word in after being drowned out by noise, opinions, and distraction. And intuition doesn't speak in full sentences. It speaks in feelings, in nudges, in recurring thoughts. When someone keeps resurfacing in your mind, intuition isn't asking you to obsess. It's asking you to look deeper. What does this connection reveal about me? What part of myself did I meet through them? What truth have I been avoiding? Those questions lead to growth, and growth doesn't always feel good at first. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes it brings grief. Sometimes it brings regret. But on the other side of that discomfort is clarity, and clarity is peaceful. Clarity allows you to release without resentment, to remember without longing, to appreciate without attachment. And that's real healing. So no thinking about someone doesn't mean you're stuck. It means you're processing. It means your inner world is still integrating something meaningful. And that process deserves patience, not judgment. You don't need to rush yourself. You don't need to force closure. You don't need to pretend you're unaffected. You just need to be honest. Honest with yourself first. Because when you stop fighting your feelings, they stop fighting you. Eventually the thoughts soften. They come less urgently. They feel less heavy. Not because the connect. Ion was meaningless, but because its purpose has been fulfilled. And when that happens, you don't feel empty. You feel complete. We move toward the end of this reflection. There's one truth that keeps rising above everything else. The mind doesn't hold on to people by accident. We like to believe thoughts are random, but the heart doesn't work that way. It remembers what mattered. It remembers what changed you. It remembers where you felt alive, seen, understood, or deeply hurt. And it doesn't let those memories go until they've done their work. When someone stays on your mind long after the conversation stopped, that's not a flaw in you. That's a sign of depth. Shallow connections don't linger. They fade quickly, quietly, without resistance. But the ones that touch something real inside you, those leave impressions. They become reference points. They become part of your internal story. And the mistake many people make is assuming that thinking about someone means you need to go back to them. That's not always true. Sometimes the mind revisits a person, not because you want them again, but because you're finally ready to understand what they represent. Time gives clarity, distance gives perspective, and maturity allows you to see things you couldn't see while emotions were loud. There's also this idea that strength means emotional detachment, that once something ends, You should shut the door completely, never look back, never feel again. But that's not strength. That's armor. And armor might protect you from pain, but it also blocks intimacy, growth, and truth. Real strength is being able to sit with your feelings without letting them control you. It's acknowledging, yes, this person mattered to me, without letting that fact define your future. It's understanding that you can carry meaning without carrying attachment. People often ask, how do I know when I've healed? Healing doesn't look like forgetting. Healing looks like remembering. Without breaking, you know you've healed when the thought of them no longer shakes you, when it no longer creates urgency or anxiety, when it becomes a quiet acknowledgement instead of a sharp ache. Healing is when the memory settles into wisdom instead of longing, and that process takes time. It takes honesty. It takes reflection. We don't talk enough about how unfinished emotional business drains people. It shows up as overthinking, as emotional exhaustion, as frustration that doesn't seem to have a clear source. And many people try to fix that by distracting themselves, new relationships, new routines, new noise. But distraction doesn't resolve anything. It only delays it. Resolution comes from facing what you avoided. Maybe the truth is you never allowed yourself to grieve properly. Maybe you never forgave them or yourself. Maybe you never admitted how deeply it affected you because you were afraid of what that would say about you. But feelings don't disappear because you ignore them. They transform. They show up in other areas of your life until you acknowledge them. That's why reflection is not optional. It's necessary. Reflection helps you separate the person from the lesson. It helps you understand what you're meant to carry forward and what you're meant to leave behind. Sometimes the lesson is about boundaries. Sometimes it's about communication. Sometimes it's about timing. Sometimes it's a bow. You're learning your own emotional capacity. And once the lesson is integrated, the attachment loosens naturally. No forcing. No pretending, just release. There's also a quiet truth many people avoid. Not every meaningful connection is meant to last forever. Some are meant to arrive, change you, and leave. Their purpose isn't longevity, it's transformation. And that doesn't make them failures. It makes them chapters. A chapter doesn't need to continue to be important. When you understand that, you stop fighting the memory. You stop asking, why am I still thinking about this? And start asking, what did this shape in me? That shift alone brings peace. Now, before we close, let me leave you with a short story. Not long, just enough to sit with. There was once a man who walked the same path every day to get home. On that path stood an old tree. For years, he never noticed it. He walked past it, distracted, focused on where he was going next. One day, after a long season of loss and change, he stopped walking so fast. And for the first time, he noticed a tree. Its bark was scarred. Some branches were broken, but it was still standing, still growing. Curious, he sat beneath it. Days passed. He began stopping there often. He realized the tree had been there during the happiest years of his life. And it had been there during the hardest ones too. It didn't move forward with him, but it shaped the path he walked. Eventually, the man moved to a different place. He no longer walked that road. But sometimes when he slowed down, he still thought about the tree. Not because he wanted to go back, but because it reminded him of who he became. While walking past it, the tree wasn't meant to follow him, it was meant to shape him. And that's the message some people are meant to stay in your life, but they are meant to stay in your story, not as pain, not as regret, but as proof that you felt deeply, loved honestly, and grew through connection. If someone still crosses your mind, don't judge yourself. Don't rush yourself. Listen, reflect, learn, and when the lesson is complete, peace will fall. Not because you forgot them, but because you finally understood what they were there to teach you.